Hey guys, welcome back to Luke chapter 5. So now we're doing 17 through 26, it looks like. So 17 through 26, Jesus is going to take it up a notch. So pause, read, we'll break it down in a second. Okay, so Jesus, man, rock star status, crowds everywhere. And now Luke's going to introduce us to new groups of people, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, or scribes, is how they are listed in other Gospels. Alright, so the Pharisees and the scribes are these religious groups. There's 4 or 5 new religious groups that emerged in between Malachi and Matthew. So in those sort of 400 years of dark ages, we have all these new religious groups. The Pharisees are all about the law, or the Bible. They love it. They're obsessed with it, and they're all about the temple, kind of like preserving the temple worship. That sounds good. I mean, and it is good. But the problem is, like Satan always does, he takes a good thing and makes it a God thing. So with the Pharisees, the law kind of became their God, to the point where they were so obsessed, they took the laws God came up with and they even added to that. They had over 600 laws that they made people obey. And so by the time we get to Jesus, the Pharisees represent religion. So anytime you see Pharisees, it's like, okay, that's organized religion, moral code, law, and the scribes are right there with them. They're the guys that are copying the Bible and, again, obsessed with all of this religious stuff. So these guys are following Jesus around now because they've heard about him. I mean, word's getting out about Jesus, and they're like, we got to check this guy out. So Jesus is in a house teaching, and the house is packed with all these people, but probably all these religious people. And it's packed so full of the religious types that the poor that Jesus came to help, remember these guys? The poor and the prisoners and the blind and the oppressed, they can't even get in the house. Kind of sounds like some churches today, right? So sometimes we pack our churches so full of us religious types that, like, all the outsiders, they don't even feel like they can get in. And I'm speaking figuratively, of course. They feel like they're like, I can't go in there with all those, religious people. I'll just be looked down on. So that's sort of what's happening here. But there's a paralyzed guy, and he really wants to get to see Jesus. So his buddies are like, let's do this. They climb up on the roof, they drag him up there, they rip off the roof, and they lower him down, right? Verse 18, some men carrying a paralytic man. Mark says there's 4 guys. So these 4 guys, they rip off the roof and they lower him down. So Jesus is in there teaching. Imagine the scene. Jesus is teaching, and, it's falling down, it's flaking down, and the roof is ripped off. The roofs back then were like some boards and like sticks and a lot of mud, a lot of clay mud. So easy to rip off. And they rip off this roof and they lower this guy down, and everybody's like, what is going on? And Jesus looks at him and he says, be healed. No, he doesn't say anything about him being paralyzed. He looks at him and says, friend, your sins are forgiven. And the guy's like, wow, that's nice, but that's not really why I'm here, Jesus. I kind of wanted to walk. And so Jesus doesn't offer him that right away. He just says, your sins are forgiven. It's interesting because this guy didn't ask for his sins to be forgiven, right? But Jesus says, because of your faith, right? Look at verse 20. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, friend, your sins are forgiven. Now, the Pharisees and the scribes, they're thinking, blasphemy. Who is this guy? How does he forgive sins? And so Jesus reads their thoughts. It's an honor challenge. Uh-oh, you just insulted me. You just called me a blasphemer. So Jesus isn't going to let that go, right? So he says, wait a minute. And he gives them a riddle. Okay, which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or get up and walk? Well, it's easier to say, your sins are forgiven, because you can't measure that. You can't judge it. And then Jesus says, but to show you that I have authority. Look at this, verse 24. But that you may know that the Son of Man is from the Old Testament, the book of Daniel, the Messiah. So he's basically saying, I'm the Messiah. The Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So here's what he's saying. To show you that I have authority, the authority of God. Watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to add, get up and walk. Just to show you that I can forgive sins. He said to the paralyzed man, I tell you, get up, take your mat, go home. And the guy got up, took his mat, and he went home, rejoicing, praising God. He went home praising God. Everyone was amazed. There they are. Everybody's always amazed at what Jesus is doing. We have seen remarkable things today. That's an understatement. And so here's our takeaway. Friend, your sins are forgiven. Because, guys, here you go. So back to the riddle. Here's the thing. Which is easier to say? Your sins are forgiven or walk? Your sins are forgiven is easier to say, right? No, think about it. When Jesus says your sins are forgiven, it's not easier for him to say that because he knows what has to happen in order for this guy's sins to be forgiven. And it hasn't happened yet, has it? Jesus has to die. So every time Jesus heals a leper or forgives Peter's sins on the boat or looks at a paralyzed dude and says, your sins are forgiven, he knows that in order for that to happen, he's going to have to be violently murdered, and he's going to have to die, and he's going to have all of your sins and all of my sins put upon him, and he's going to have to be cursed by God, and he's going to have to lose fellowship with his Father in order for him to make this very statement. And he's still making that statement today to all of us. Friend, your sins are forgiven. And every time you screw up, every time you mess up, Jesus is looking at you and going, friend, your sins are forgiven. Because we are the friends of God. We are reconciled to God. It's a great thought. All right, tomorrow we're going to see another guy, yet another one, another sinner whose sins will be forgiven. All right, I'll see you then. Have a great day.